had you do some coursework that is designed to help people beat large fields, especially at the WSOP. That'll be part of the approach with what I am aiming for with the Jungleverse, as we're calling it. What's up, guys? Today I've got someone who is one of the best analysts I think that's out there in the poker world, and he's come from Wall Street. Actually, he spent 13 years on Wall Street, and to be an analyst in poker is a growing need in the poker world, with poker getting so analytical and requiring software, and it's not everyone's skill set to be able to do this. And in fact, I've hired Bill because he's so good at his job, and I thought it'd be good to have him on the podcast. What's up, Bill? How are you liking the poker world?
Hey, Dan. The poker world's been awesome. It's been quite a journey so far.
Cool. You were saying, you're telling me that you were planning on going to the poker world from Wall Street for quite a while, and that Wall Street is pretty similar to poker. Is that the correct? Is that right?
Yeah, totally. So the story is, I was playing a lot of poker in undergrad. So I might not look it, but I actually turned 40 just recently. So this was almost 15 years ago. And when I was in undergrad, I was playing a lot of sit and goes, heads up PLO. This was in 2005. Everybody was playing. And I thought, if I spend the same amount of time and effort working and studying, I could probably play poker later when I want to. So it was sort of a long game decision. And I put poker away for almost a decade. And I didn't really play much until I was working in New York in 2015, and I started playing weekend tournaments in Foxwood. Then around COVID, I basically jumped full-time into poker. I was playing online on ACR a lot, and I moved my family out to Vegas about 3 years ago. So I was out of poker for a long time, but I was always had my eyes on it, and I've been fully in it for the last 3 years. And you're definitely right. There's a lot of similarity between working in finance and poker. The main thing is everyone is really competitive. We're all trying to win using, whatever information we have at our disposal. The analogy is pretty simple. It's you use a mix of GTO, you use a mix of reads, you read a mix of just basic strategy, whatever works, right? And the truth is somewhere in between. And Wall Street is the same way. There you have the quants who do the pure number stuff. You got the lawyers and the bankers, and interestingly, that's kind of what I did when I was working in finance. I was working in what's called structured finance. Basically, we did a lot of deals. My boss was a lawyer, and I was the quant, the analyst on the team. Not too different than what you and I are doing right now. So they would write up the docs, they would do the deals, and I would model it out to poke holes in the deal and try to optimize it and squeak out a few extra nickels here and there. Once in a while, we might find a dollar bill on the ground that people who are looking at one way, not another, might not see, just like in poker, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you remind me about how to actually find the edges in poker, which we'll get into later, or at least I would like to hear your perspective on it. Is there any particular reason why you decided not to follow that path in finance, and you decided poker over finance?
So for me personally, what drew me to finance is similar to what drew me to poker. I'm trying not to get too heady, but it's a kind of philosophical thing for me. I see it as both finance and poker as a reflection of life, in that you get rewarded for being closer to the truth with the capital T. If somebody else there see things the wrong way or choose not to accept reality, and you're close to reality, you're going to be rewarded. In finance, very simply, in poker too, you understand the game better than the other guy. That to me is knowing the truth. And interestingly, I had a similar discussion when I first joined poker, when I went to Vegas with Chewy. And that's how I met him, because he also shared a very similar view in that we both believe poker kind of brings out your best self. It's a reflection of our mind when we play. If you have mental leaks, it's going to show up at the table. And for us to be our best selves at the table, you got to understand both the external world and the inner world better than the next guy. And that's the ultimate edge.
So it sounds like you had a bit of a competitive attitude towards that, and were basically truth seeking. That's what I'm getting from this. And I don't know, maybe go ahead.
Oh, totally. So I grew up in grade school, starting in middle school and high school. I was playing competitive chess. I basically traveled for a chess tournament every other week. My whole childhood was just about chess. So I was too competitive, anything, to the point where I had to leave the chess world because I knew it was. I wasn't hanging out. I wasn't being social. I was just always care about winning. To the point where it became unhealthy, and I had to take a break. When I went to college, I stopped playing chess completely, um, and I switched over to poker, which I think is much more like real life than chess. Chess is very black and white. There's no second place. There's no compromise. You have all the information out there, so whoever can calculate better. And it appealed to me when I was a kid, but when I became older, it kind of turned me off a bit, and it conflicted with what I saw life was about. And then I found poker, and it just jived with, at least at the time. I guess it's even still right now, I haven't really changed that much since then. Uh, in that, it sounds a bit weird, but I guess you understand. Even when losing in poker, kind of feels good in that it humbles you in a very deep way. In chess, if you're even better than the next guy by a little bit, you just crush them consistently, like no mercy. But in poker, let's say you play heads up, even if you're really good, the other guy is, not great, but competent. I mean, what is your edge at most? Like 60-40, maybe 65-35 if, it's like you really get a heads up. But you're really humble by the reality of it all, and it always pulls you down to earth. And I found that part about poker to be very zen. It's like, hey, you feel like you own the world, but it catches up to you eventually, and we can only do so much. And it reminds you to do our best every day and collect the small edges, and because they add up. But nothing is guaranteed.
Well, I didn't expect to. Well, actually, we did have a discussion where a bit of philosophical discussion before. Although I didn't expect the philosophical side to come out for some reason. From it's not. I think when most people think of it like an analyst, they don't think of like someone who's like really deep and like really reverent of like the humbling aspects of variance, that sort of thing. But it does make sense. Yeah, I mean that is pretty much what you're supposed to do in poker. It's really just finding the right perspective and then owning it in. But I still have to ask, is there something missing from Wall Street that didn't provide that? I also think I don't know really how Wall Street works. It might be more political or something along those lines. I don't really, yeah, because I would think that at least to some extent that's how Wall Street works. But maybe it's like
There's nothing missing from Wall Street per se. In fact, I wasn't planning on going to poker until maybe another 5 to 10 years later. I really like working. I love what I do, what I did. And it was mostly timing thing. So I'll give you a little story. So what happened was I was playing poker just a few weekends here and there. Did pretty well. I actually won. I went to Foxwood and played one of those WSOP Circuit and won the second tournament I ever entered. It was a 6-max ring event. Had a blast. I went back to next year and got second place. And I go, okay, maybe it's time to check out this poker thing again that I forgot about. So I started playing here and there, but really just, no more than a weekend, like 2-3 weekends a year. But around COVID, what happened was there was this one crazy week where my lease was coming up in a month. I decided to renew it or not. The project I was working on for the last 5 years actually died out officially, partially because of COVID. Everything just, all the funding froze up. And I went down to Florida to play the WPT because I had some free time. And I found a table, the WPT actually, along with Jesse Lanis. That was both first of our big score, and we came up together in a way. So it was this crazy week, and I talked to my wife, and I were like, hey, if we ever want to try, this is a good time. I talked to my boss. He said, hey, I know you like poker a lot. I don't have anything for you at the moment. And why don't you give it a try? If it doesn't work out, we'll talk again. And that was 3 years ago. So the timing just kind of worked itself out. But I love my job. Working on Wall Street is a lot of fun. I enjoy it a ton.
Oh. I did not expect that. For some reason, I imagined Wall Street to be a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of. I couldn't. Well, I should ask you what's fun about it. I imagine it to be a little bit like Wolf of Wall Street in a way. Maybe not that extreme, but a mix of no, mostly not that, but at least like a handful of guys just like spending a lot of money in parties and things like that, or yachts at Cannes or that sort of thing. Um, Wolf of Wall Street's probably a bit more extreme. But yeah, what did you like so much about Wall Street?
So Wolf of Wall Street is definitely not real. The reality of Wall Street for majority of people who work there is more like this movie called Margin Call, which is much more boring and much more sedated. But there's an
Yeah,
element of billions
see
in there,
that.
so it's 75% margin call and 25% billions. In that people, I mean, they do well. There's some people who do really, really well, but most of us are more like middle class, maybe upper middle class. Nothing crazy. Most of us are just have a family, enjoy what we do, working with smart people, eating what you kill, so to speak, kind of like poker. In fact, a lot like poker, right? Competitive, smart people who are kind of seeking the same thing, who put your best self out there. The whole team is in it to win it together, that kind of thing. It's not that different from poker. But what I personally love about working in finance, beyond the philosophical stuff that I mentioned, was I just had a really good team that I work with. What we did was, as I mentioned, we did deals where there are really the three of us. There was a lawyer, there's the
Hmm.
more traditional finance guy, and there was me. I took all the docs, all the lawyer docs, and I basically modeled them up, and we used the models in negotiation to kind of understand what matters a lot to us and not as much for the other side, and we ask for that stuff. And likewise, what matters a lot to them and not as much to us, and we give it to them. And you can see that if you can model your way through the deal better than the next guy using this approach, you're going to come out ahead better than the people who don't. Just kind of like poker, you can have people who are not as up to date with the modern tools, and they will do just fine. But if you have someone, I guess like me, who is helping you out, say, hey, if we do some no locks here, you know the adjustment, but if you really want to get to nail the adjustment, if they're free betting 10% instead of 15%, we know that we need to go a little more snug, but how much more snug? We know they're not check racing enough, we can barrel a bit wider, but how much wider? Like you get the ballpark without it just by being in the game, but having the quantitative components, the analysis, just make everything a bit more precise. But at the same token, if you just go purely the quant route, you'll be missing a lot of stuff on the table. So what I like about finance and poker is that you're not leaving anything on the table. There is no rules that say you have to do it this way or that way. It's anything goes. So I love the fact that you have to not be stubborn. You get rewarded for not being stubborn. You have to use all the information you have. You have to quantify it to the best you can, model it out, and then turn it back to the qualitative stuff as you execute. That to me is just so much fun because that's what the real world is like. There's no set rules. We all trying to win and try to get the best edge we can, and it's you just it's anything goes. And I love the aspects of being able to be creative with numbers. I guess the opposite would be chess, at least for me. Maybe I'm just not good enough, where it's mostly quantitative. It's mostly just calculating. I like the interaction of numbers and words and being rewarded for it. That's a lot of fun.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think the technical aspect of poker is. I still think there's quite some edge in there, at least in the way people approach things. It seems like people are missing how to deal with things, particularly that you can gain through node locking and just for playing like a number of spots not really well. I don't think people take at least. I mean, I personally don't go quite the extremes as the no lock might do. It might like start raising like I've seen so many spots where it would raise like 33% of the pot or 33% of the time or more with like stone air, a lot of someone like c-bets too much or things like that. And I just don't think people are doing like that anywhere near to the degree that perhaps they could at least. And maybe they're doing it in like GG reg battles or some shit, ACR reg battles where I'm just like I don't know. I'm not really that interested in that. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've had you run some reports, and it's also on some. We looked at some ICM based spots too, and it looked like really there's a lot to it that it definitely looked like, even though the technical side is, I still think it's beaten to death quite a bit. It's still something that needs to be maximized on for anyone who's trying to take poker seriously, and there really is quite some edge. As a matter of fact, can you give a couple examples that you recall from your work that were particularly striking in well, poker? Poker would be better for the audience.
Yeah, totally. One of them is what you share. If the other side is c-betting too much, you can basically you can almost double, sometimes triple the amount that you check raise. And the reason why you use the small size is if they're c-betting everything, let's say like ace high, and they're supposed to, and when you check raise, they just have air that for them to continue, for your check raise to not be immediately profitable, they have to flow really, really wide. Not just backdoor, but like just 2 cards below the top and the middle card. And most people are just not comfortable doing that, especially when they're facing opponents that they don't know has done the work. They're just going to give up because the game evolved to the way it did for a reason. One of the things I love, and when I studied with Chewy and Nick, one thing that we always found amusing is when we go deep in the lab, either through straight up GTO or sometimes with no lock, is when we find a line that looks so donkey, that looks wrong, like min clicking with aces, that turn out to be actually GTO or donks in leading in general. Like there are a lot of leads in the big blinds, there are a lot of leads in the small blind that people are not doing, that in the solver world you're doing 10, 15, sometimes a third of the time, like monoboard. Monoboard, you late position open, small blind flat, you can lead on the mono depending on the high cards, something like a quarter to a third of the time depending on the board. People nowadays know to lead on from the big blind when it comes 3 low cards, but leading for the small blind is still pretty rare, and that people are not doing. And we can take that one step further, right? Okay, so you're supposed to lead from the small blind. People are not doing it. That also has implication for c-betting in position. Because if you run the sims allowing for leads in the small blind and people are not doing it, so when you bet into them, if you're supposed to bet 80% of the time and people are pure checking to you 100% of the time from the small blind, the 80% of the time often drops to something like 60 or even 50% of the time, because the range is a lot stronger. Just stuff like that it's not as necessary like some crazy sexy move that like Ali or Dabo were doing, like, oh, I can 2x overbet probe on this turn when it comes to low card. There's that. There's also a lot of little singles that you can score by just adjusting better than people who are not accounting for those little notes that the solver telling you clearly you can do. Maybe it's not like the majority line. Like I said, it's like 10, 20%, but they add up. If you assume 20% frequency lead is 0, sure, you play once a trade, you get away with it. But if you're assuming it's literally 0, and you play your whole career with this c-bet strategy, you're going to leave some money on the table. Now we can go the other way. Right now, the first degree is we're leading at a small blind when we're allowed to, people are not doing. The second degree of adjustment is, oh, people are not leading, so let me start c-betting more. The third degree of adjustment is, okay, I'm supposed to lead here, and I know that guy hasn't done his work, but he's smart enough to know that I have some leads. So I'm going to over check raise to account for that fact. So it's kind of fun that you can get a non-GTO style leveling war within a very GTO framework, and I love that stuff. It's so fun.
That is really funny to get in some weird permutation like that. It's kind of rare I find myself in those, to be honest. It happens every once in a while. Although, I mean, I'm probably biased, but I always feel like I have the advantage with these situations because I don't know. I just find that it seems that I don't know. I usually just rely on my understanding most of the time. It seems to be good enough. But yeah, some stuff like that's can be really useful. Like I didn't know a whole lot about the whole small blind leading situations, but there are some other situations I can tell you about that I found. There are leads in 3-bet pots, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, 765 mono especially, but 765 two-tone. lots of lead. Like I think you're leading like 40% of the time.
Okay, I didn't know it was 40%, but I was thinking of like something exactly like that, to be honest, or like 8, 9, 7, something along those lines. There's also I did there was one really weird spot I found. I don't think you needed anything fancy for it, but I did in fact node lock this in the Discord chat because it was so what the like it just wildly surprised me. But it was no antes, and it was like early position versus button 3-bet or something like that. And the thought would be it was like an actual spot that I had in a game, and it was the board was 4 for 4, and I had king queen out of position. And I thought, okay, I can't fold this, surely. I mean, on this board, or else I'm really folding a lot. And it turns out that in position does not c-bet 100%, as a lot of people are doing, and c-bet's a larger size. And c-bet's closer to 66%, which wildly surprised me. And like the the out of position guys, the strategy is actually supposed to be like even 200 big blinds deep. I feel like I must have done something wrong even talking about it, but it's like check min raise, like literally check min raise like 20+%. Like what the is going on right now? And I started no locking. Well, what if we see bet 100% of the time, and then it would like start to lead the turn? Like, and I have to no luck it to not lead the turn because obviously no one does that. But I found like that spot to be really interesting. I don't think I had you look at that one, but yeah, clearly if you do your work properly, there's definitely some stuff out there that people are not really taking into account.
Oh, totally. I mean, Dan, you can go even farther than that. And this is where, in my opinion, the fun stuff kicks in. And that's that. This is more about my personal approach to poker. And that is, you can do stuff that is quote unquote not software allowed, and it's totally fine. I'm talking about like you instead of looking at the software strategy and say, I'm supposed to do this here that percent of the time. In my opinion, the really, really right way to use the software is to not look at the strategy per se, but you got to look at the EV. A lot of time, the EV difference is so small, right? Because the way the software works is if one line makes a little bit more money, it's going to pick that line like all the time. But if you look at the EV difference between one line versus another, a lot of time, the EV difference is like tiny. Sometimes it's like literally zero. I mean, if it's literally zero, it'll be mixed. But we're talking about like as small as it gets, but while the software still picks here one way or another. So to me, the right way to study is to really, really dive deep into the EV difference of different lines and understand what you can get away with. So I think of it as there is not so much looking for what to do as much as to understand what you're not allowed to do. And as long as you stay somewhat clear of the not allowed to do, you have a lot of freedom to go anywhere from block to overbet. You can have at it. You can donk any street. You can check raise at whatever size. So that to me brings back the creativity of the game because now I'm basically having a green light, right? If you really understand what's going on, you would have in your mind a rough idea of how much EV it costs you to take a quote-unquote suboptimal line. But you have to weigh that against what your understanding of the actual human opponent is and how much EV they're losing by making them fight on your turf, right? That's one of the main insight in the art of war. You want them to pick the battlefield you're choosing. So by the solver for me is understanding how different terrains, how much it costs you to move to different terrain. And then the execution part of the game is choosing terrain that really puts your opponent in the max pain. And when you net out the two, the cost of choosing a suboptimal line and having a clear view of where your opponent's weak points are, then you can come up in the real world, the real optimal line. And the way to, but the issue is once you go down that path, you're kind of in no man's land. And this to me is where the real poker mastery really pays off, is by understand the game better than your opponent and navigate better than they do. It's kind of like, have you heard of Fisher random chess?
No, I haven't heard of that. I've heard of Art of War though.
So Fisher random chess is you arrange the chessboard randomly at the start of the game.
Oh yeah.
The idea is instead of letting people instead of determining who the better player is by who is the more studied, and in some cases straight memorization. You determine who the chess player is by who can adapt to this weird situation better. So what I just described to me is kind of like Fisher random poker. You put them in weird spots, and the guys who are just popping up the solver, kind of semi-memorizing the line and just kind of going through the motion, playing robotically, they will get just murder because whenever it's like the Tyson line, right? Everyone has a game plan till they get punched in the mouth, and then it all goes out the window. Like to your point earlier, you have those weird leads, you have those weird check raise. When people don't know what's going on, they're not just going to stick a random race in there. A lot of time people freeze up and they just call you, or they just give up and say, I'll take the next one. And the more you can do that, the more you fight on your terrain, the more you can get away with it. And so to me, the ultimate art of studying poker is to know how to fight those battles. It is not to know how to navigate a 5-bet pot better than the next guy. To me, that's just like a hopeless endeavor. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Actually, matter of fact, I had a very similar idea. I would have personally tried to find lines. What I do is like try like a lot of viable possible strategies, and just see which ones their players are most likely to make a mistake on. I mean, I think it would require quite a bit of work. That being said, a lot of my own personal strategy is around, like, really what I do a lot is I just create nodes that, or put people in situations where they're more likely to make mistakes as a population. It's not so much person specific unless I have specific reads, but it's very hard to get specific reads on your opponents, and with like data mining not being available, and on top of that, even if you were to data mine, it would take quite a bit of work. You would have to where was I going with this? Yeah, it's just quite hard to like make the perfect counter strategy to someone, if even with doing that. What you can do is, as you said, like pick a bunch of situations and put them in a bunch of like not so typical spots that sacrifice a little bit of EV according to GTO, and just see how they perform. Matter of fact, I actually had someone recently on the podcast that'll be coming out soon that did almost exactly this, or at least he did this, but he didn't like adjust for the spots that the guy was playing like shit against, but he made like a whole heads up the strategy where he like went into 4 different lines, 4 different preflop sizes, and like worked all of this out to beat the other guy, and the other guy just like I guess sucked at adjusting to a lot of those sizes and things like that. But that sounded like a shitload of work to make reality. But there's potential of that for sure.
Oh, totally. It's definitely a lot of work. But to me, this is where the hard work pays off. So like you can work and just looking at pure GTO and spend a lot of time. But the marginal gain, the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, the smaller it is. But this approach that we're talking about, you're always expanding your game plan, and you're always finding creative way to put people in tough spot. I think the marginal return goes down a lot slower than the more traditional approach. And there's another chess analogy, which is when you run a chess engine, my understanding is that Grandmaster, they don't just look at necessarily the best line. They look at the line that have very, very similar EV. Instead of picking the literal best, they have a preference to pick the line that is a bit more tricky. That, for example, if I play this line that if you play perfect, might be like even. But if I take the second best line and you play perfect, you might get a small edge on me. But for you to manifest that edge, you have to play the next 40 move without a single error. And if you do, the edge comes right back to me. Stuff like that. Reminds me of Magnus Carlsen, their, I guess, former now world chess champion. He said something along the line of, in a chess-based interview that I read, that stuck with me, which is they asked him, what is your style? Are you a technical player? Are you a positional player? Do you like to work with your pieces? Or do you like to focus on pawn structure? He said, basically, style is weakness. When you have a style, it's basically a preference. And when you have a preference, you deviate from the truth. To me, that is the ultimate edge, ultimate like flexible mindset. You go with what the universe gives you based on the particular scenario you have. Instead of coming in and say, I like to play this way, and I'm just going to choose it because it fits. It makes me comfortable. He's saying that No, you get thrown in the ocean and you either swim or you sink, and you got to figure out where to go, and you cannot come up with a game plan. And it fits a lot with what we just talked about, in that now the other guy is so used to having a set game plan, and they have preferences on style. They might play small ball, they might do the crazy overbet, they might do this and that, and you hit them with like this tiny little check raise or tiny little leads, or maybe like a bigger than normal check raise, and they go, whoa, what's going on? And now what they thought was style, and what they thought was a strength became a weakness on their part, because now they realize that their preference for a normal line is actually holding them back. And you're the ultimate flexible player by understanding the game better than the next guy. And this is how you monetize that edge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. His answer's, I mean, it's correct. It's almost like they might have, it might have been a little bit annoying for the reporter. I think the reporter might have been asking like, well, what actually works for you most of the time in terms of like what part of this whole like sea of strategy do you actually use? Because certain things just outright work better than others. As an example, I would think anyway that like a small check raise would be a much more viable strategy as an exercise than a really big check raise, because it's not very easy to know what to defend against a small check raise, but it's pretty easy to know what to defend against a really big check raise. Apparently,
Exactly.
though, apparently, it's not as obvious as I thought to what you might defend against an overbet. But in which case, an overbet would now be a more viable strategy than I thought. But anytime like what the play is that you're supposed to do is really obvious, you should like reconsider to see if there are other possibilities where you can create situations where other people can make mistakes. Because the more mistakes people make, the more money is potentially made.
That's exactly it. I mean, this is what I tell my students is you don't want to help the other guy play perfect by accident.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. You want to help them to not play perfectly.
Exactly.
um, I want to talk a bit about our upcoming stuff as well, because I've had you do some coursework that is designed to help people beat large fields, especially at the WSOP. That'll be part of the approach with what I am aiming for with the Jungleverse, as we're calling it. So there's that, and it'll be like kind of a how-to to get people up to speed to like how to like win in a pretty, a certain important section of the poker market. I would say, maybe one of the approaches of what the Jungleverse will be doing. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So definitely, the track that we'll be working on, this is not a beginner's course, nor is it an advanced course. What we're really addressing are concepts that we think is what drives poker strategy. And we try to deliver the content in a way that is very clear, in plain English, and in a way that is actionable by using real hand examples that will pop up, when you go sit down and play a poker tournament. But we're not holding back and try to dumb it down. We're going straight to the meat of the theory. Like we have stuff, I'm looking at the module 1 right now. The first one we talk about is equity versus EV. It's not like, how to play a single race pot from the button. This is definitely theory driven, in that the ultimate goal is to introduce ideas that are driving basically, modern poker strategy, so we can onboard people into what's out there in terms of analysis. Namely, in this case, the Jungleverse, to introduce idea and a common language so that they can move on to more advanced material. So it's theory driven, but it's explained in a way that is very practical, as opposed to like, hey, here's the theory stuff and get really mathy and dense, or here's like, how do you play this spot? Here's the tricks to beat the pros. We're kind of doing it in the right way, like teaching a man to fish instead of giving him a fish. We're teaching people the right way, but at the same time, we're giving them a nice meal. We're giving them a lot of actionable strategy they can use right off the bat. So I mentioned the first one we talk about is equity EV, because that is what drives a lot of poker strategy. If we just sit here and just flip coins all day, we'll be doing an equity bet. There's no point in skill. The whole point of playing poker is to go beyond the cards that you dealt, your equity, and to gain EV. And how do we do that? We do that by denying equity and by over-realizing ours. When you put it like that, without any context, it might sound really ephemeral, like really conceptual. But if you explain it through practical example, I think people are going to say, oh, I get it. So this is why they use those tools to measure EV and why they talk and think the way they do, because that is what the point of the game is about. And that's the very first lesson. And then later on, we talk about things like, why do opening ranges look the way they do? Why do we open tighter earlier than later? Well, because you're going to get free bet more because there are more people behind you. But not only are we talking about that, we're going to show ranges of actual spots so you can actually learn some practical knowledge along the way. And then we get into stuff like, well, what about free betting ranges? Why do they look the way they do? Well, you free bet the way you do, namely, you flat the middle and you free bet the good stuff and the bad stuff because you don't want to put in too much money with hands that are not worth enough. And you are trying to make opponent indifferent to 4-betting you, because when they do put in the 4-bet, you continue with the good stuff and not the bad stuff. So now we introduce a concept of polar versus linear ranges and why it causes indifference. So we're trying to sneak in really, really important concepts, but we're using plain English to introduce it. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, it's echoes part of what I believe to be an important approach towards poker, which is to not get so caught up in the weeds with like really extreme theory and to go for the things that really matter. And with WSOP coming up, I think it's really important to, well, we're aiming to help a lot of people to make quite a bit of money in a variety of different fields, but especially like the big fields such as the Gladiator, the Mystery Bounty, and the Main Event, and all of that. And this course will be aimed at people who are looking to win at those kinds of fields and be, a large percentage of the population. It's not quite it. It won't help to dominate like top pros or anything like that. But we're aiming towards a large group of people, and I think. Yeah, the big key that we're focusing on lately at the Jungleverse is WSOP, and we'll be having a special WSOP bootcamp training program with a bunch of the people who have won main events in the past, well, not main events, bracelets in the past, and we'll be giving lectures on how to win those bracelets, and there'll be another one of our coaches joining, Jel, who will be assisting with the seminar as well to provide people whatever they need in terms of what's not going to overwhelm them with what's not going to overwhelm you guys with like tons and tons of material to beat these events, but just these last minute information that should help put you guys to have a good edge against the common competition at these sorts of events. But basically, we're going to take WSOP down, and we're going to do it in a way that's not going to burn all our time, burn all of your time, and also get you up to a pretty good speed really fast. That's the idea. You got to capitalize on WSOP, which is a really good time to make money. And as a side note, the main focus of my community, as we're now calling it the Jungleverse, is that I'm aspiring to help you guys succeed to really make money and fulfill whatever your goals are. And that doesn't mean, at least in my mind, it's not really going to mean being the most technically advanced, period, although we'll have all of that. It's going to be more a matter of like using your time wisely and finding the right spots and learning the right skills that will be appropriate for whatever you're doing. In this case, crushing WSOP, but we're also going to be focusing in a variety of different areas, such as how to become an influencer at some point, creating a jobs market and all of that, also finding the right spots in other areas when things are not so obvious and there's not just a WSOP hanging around. That's the overall theme of the community, and it'll be echoed through Phil's work and also through this bootcamp that we're launching.
Exciting stuff. We got a lot of work coming up.
glad to have Phil on the team for prepping all this stuff. I really think he's one of the best out there with the kind of analysis that he provides. Um, do you have any words on what you're expecting for this WSOP? Do you have any big goals yourself, or um, any expectations for the aspiring poker pro during all this?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've only been on the journey for the last 3 years full time, and I think a lot of lessons I learned along the way would be pretty fresh. And one of the big one, and everyone talks about it, but not a lot of people carry it out, and it's very real. Specific WSOP is to make sure you don't burn out. There are always events around the corner, and they're always so tempting, and it's always like, oh my God, there's this game out there, I have to play it. No, sir, you don't have to do anything. Make sure you get rest. Make sure you eat well. Make sure you don't burn out. It's better to be 90%, 95% in 10 events than 70% in 50 events, because those edges, they're not linear in the sense that if you're not at your peak shape, you're not going to have any edge. You don't. It's not like multi-tabling online. You don't just say, "I'll give up half my EV and play double the table." It doesn't work like that. You need to be in your peak shape, and because what really happens is that opportunity is going to flash, and you're going to have a moment to capture it. And if you're not in your peak shape, you won't grab it, and that's how you win a tournament this summer.
That's an interesting point. I forgot about that. I'm a little bit privileged in that I get to play like high stakes mixed games, which are quite fun, and it's a lot nicer than, if I'm really honest, it's nicer than going to the Bally's and grinding tournaments. From my experience, there's a lot of things that I don't really love about that personally. It might be an interesting idea to get a little group solution to a few of the problems, such as eating regular food there or decent food there is kind of hard, I noticed. Yeah, I can imagine just grinding that forever is not going to be a great idea. It's probably worth like timing your breaks, players, whoever you guys are, your breaks, so that you don't have to stay there all the time. It'd be really brutal to like spend all your time in the valleys playing tournaments. And there's a lot of cool things out there. That being said, I will personally be providing support for you guys, as for my clients and people that are aiming to help anyway, for crushing the WSOP. And Phil will be there too, and if he's not too busy, he'll be providing his support as well. So I do think that, especially when situations such as final tables happen, it's important to be able to have the right group for backing you up when these sorts of things happen, because these are really unusual situations, and it can be really easy to not play them optimally because of because of a bit of a psychological things going on, and quite some difference in how ICM affects play at these final tables, whereas I'm not 100% sure. I just think a lot of people will have some questions or need something during that time, is my personal guess.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you have, for the people watching, if you're less studied and don't have the resources, or haven't just gone through the motions to understand like what ICM's about, you basically are, by the time you get to a later day, especially in WSOP where it's really top heavy, you enter let's look at the main event. You enter a $10,000 tournament, and the min cash for the final table is $1 million, right? That's what, 100,000, $1 million. That's 100x your buy-in. When you get too late in late stages in a really big tournament like final table, and you have days off, it's definitely a plus EV investment to hire someone to give you some pointers, because it's money that pays for itself really quickly. You're not there to necessarily learn some secret, like, with a day to go, but more to avoid mistake and have some really low hanging fruit 80-20s that will help you get there a bit more often than if you're without it. And given how big the stakes are at final tables this summer, I think is very wise investment to hire somebody, even just for emotional support, even just like having the confidence to carry it through. It's just really money well spent. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer.
Well, you guys also should hopefully have friends as well, which the idea beyond the community is to make friends within the community, but friends will also should be providing you emotional support at final tables is my personal guess. But yes, of course, coaches as well, such as ourselves, will be doing that in addition. Of course, we're going to advertise ourselves. So and yeah, if your friends aren't there to support you, maybe ask who your friends are. But that's another matter. Anyway.
Nothing like a good rail, man.
That's definitely true. When we do launch, we will be launching the website enterthejungleverse.com, and I'll be providing some more information on that, and I'll be open for lots of different questions in the near future, pending WSOP pending the WSOP. I'll just be open for a lot of different questions when after we launch and during the WSOP, so that all you guys get your needs met. Phil, do you have any last thoughts or last things you'd like to add?
No, I'm good to go. Thanks for the talk. That was great.
Yeah, no problem. And best of luck to all of you, and best of luck to you, Phil, at the WSOP. And yeah, let's see. Let's make it great. Let's do it all together.
Good luck, everyone.